August 28, 2003. A terrified man walks into a bank with a ticking metal bomb locked tightly around his neck. He isn't a bank robber. He is a hostage, begging for his life. Brian Wells began his afternoon shift in the quiet city of Erie, Pennsylvania, expecting nothing more than a routine day of delivering pizzas. By mid-afternoon, this mild-mannered man would become the unwilling center of the most bizarre and horrifying bank robbery in American history. The nightmare began when Brian walked into a local PNC bank. He carried no weapon, and he never raised his voice. Instead, he calmly handed the teller a note, demanding $250,000 in cash. But it was his attire that made the bank staff freeze. Locked securely around his neck was a heavy, custom-made metal collar. Brian lifted his shirt to reveal a complex mechanical device, warning everyone that it was a live explosive wired to a timer. He told them he had been forced to put it on, and if he failed to deliver the money, it would detonate. Heavily armed police officers soon surrounded him in a nearby parking lot. Sitting on the pavement with rifles pointed at his chest, Brian pleaded for someone to help him. He explained that a group of shadowy figures had locked the bomb around his neck, forcing him into a twisted scavenger hunt to find the keys. This was no ordinary heist gone wrong. It was the opening act of a twisted, real-life scavenger hunt orchestrated by a deeply sadistic mind. We are going to untangle the disturbing web of psychological manipulation that led a completely innocent pizza delivery driver to a gruesome death. As investigators pulled at the threads of this bizarre case, they uncovered a surreal trail of evidence. They found frozen bodies hidden away in freezers, eccentric neighborhood hoarders hiding dark secrets, and a mastermind who played with human lives purely for entertainment. The deeper you look into the death of Brian Wells, the more distorted reality becomes. You will see how an incredibly complex puzzle was constructed not just to steal money, but to inflict profound psychological terror on a helpless captive. By the end of this investigation, you will question just how far human depravity can reach when it is masked behind the illusion of a brilliant, unsolvable game. Erie, Pennsylvania was a quiet working-class town in 2003. People knew their neighbors, and violent crime of this magnitude was practically unheard of. Brian worked at Mamma Mia's Pizzeria, a small, unassuming local joint. His delivery route normally took him down familiar suburban streets lined with friendly faces. But on that August afternoon, an order came in for an address at the end of a remote, unpaved road. The destination was a desolate transmission tower site, surrounded by dense, overgrown woods and a suffocating silence. It provided the perfect cover for an ambush. When Brian arrived, expecting to simply hand over a few pizzas, his tormentors were waiting. This isolated patch of wilderness quickly became the staging ground for an absolute nightmare. The sheer weight of the metal collar must have terrified him immediately. Built from heavy scrap metal, thick padlocks, and simple kitchen timers, the cumbersome device was a psychological prison. It was meticulously designed to ensure the wearer had absolutely no hope of escape once the heavy locks clicked shut, starting a deadly countdown. Before we venture further into the darkness of this crime, we need to talk about Brian Wells. It is far too easy for victims to become nothing more than a footnote in their own tragedies. Brian was 46 years old. He was a gentle, mild-mannered man who loved music and cared deeply for his rescue cats. His friends and co-workers described him as quiet, dependable, and entirely non-confrontational. He had worked at Mamma Mia's for over a decade, becoming a steady fixture in the local community who never caused trouble and always showed up for his shifts. He had no ties to organized crime. He carried no massive, secret debts. He was simply an ordinary man living a quiet life. That makes the sheer brutality of his final hours all the more horrifying. Why would someone target a harmless pizza delivery driver? As he sat on the pavement surrounded by police cruisers, the mechanical ticking of the timer echoing in his ears, he must have been paralyzed by the terrifying reality of his situation. His ordinary life had been violently hijacked. As Brian Wells sat handcuffed on the hot asphalt, surrounded by state troopers taking cover behind their vehicles, a terrifying reality began to set in. The police bomb squad had been called, but they were still miles away, caught in heavy traffic. Brian frantically explained that the heavy metal collar had a timer, and he was supposed to complete a scavenger hunt to find the keys to unlock it. He had a multi-page, handwritten set of instructions waiting in his car. But here is the part nobody talks about. The instructions were deliberately designed to be impossible. The time limits given to drive to various locations, retrieve keys from jars hidden under rocks, and move to the next were mathematically impossible to meet given the local traffic and distance. The mastermind never intended for Brian to survive this ordeal. It was a rigged game from the very start. As the minutes ticked by, Brian's initial calm began to crack. He repeatedly asked the officers why no one was trying to get this device off him. He realized, with mounting dread, that the police were too afraid to approach him, leaving him completely alone with a live explosive bolted to his neck. The tension in the parking lot reached an unbearable peak. News helicopters circled overhead, broadcasting the horrifying standoff live on local television. Brian's pleas grew more desperate by the second. He told the officers that his heart was pounding and that he knew he did not have much time left. At exactly 3:18 p.m., before the bomb squad could arrive, the device began to emit a rapid, high-pitched beeping sound. 3 minutes later, the collar detonated. The blast was fatal, ending Brian's life in front of dozens of witnesses and live television cameras. The immediate aftermath was a scene of absolute chaos and profound shock. When investigators finally approached the body, they found the bizarre, incredibly detailed instruction notes Brian had mentioned. The notes addressed him simply as the hostage, laying out a complex treasure hunt for the keys. But even more disturbing was the construction of the bomb itself. It was a sophisticated, custom-built device with decoy wires, fake components, and multiple locks. It was designed specifically to kill whoever tried to dismantle it. The police realized they were no longer just looking for a bank robber. They were hunting an evil, mechanical genius. To understand the kind of mind capable of building such a diabolical device, investigators had to look at the strange underbelly of Erie, Pennsylvania. This was not the work of a typical street gang. The complexity of the bomb and the theatrical nature of the scavenger hunt pointed to someone highly intelligent, deeply obsessive, and completely devoid of empathy. The local FBI office brought in behavioral analysts to profile the unknown bomb maker. They concluded that the perpetrator was likely a local resident, someone entirely comfortable working with tools, scrap metal, and electronics. More importantly, the profile suggested a highly manipulative personality, someone who viewed other human beings merely as pawns on a chessboard. The crime felt personal. It was not just a means to steal money, but a sadistic exercise in power and control. The mastermind wanted an audience. They wanted the police to be baffled, and they wanted to prove they were the smartest person in the room. As detectives canvassed the area near the transmission tower where Brian was ambushed, they realized they were dealing with a local predator who knew the local geography intimately, hiding in plain sight. The investigation took a wildly unexpected turn exactly 1 month after Brian's tragic death. A man named Bill Rothstein, a brilliant but eccentric local handyman who lived just a few miles from the transmission tower, called the police in a complete panic. He confessed that there was a frozen body inside a chest freezer in his garage. When police arrived, they found the remains of a man named James Roden. Rothstein claimed he had not killed Roden. Instead, he pointed the finger at his former fiancée, an incredibly intelligent and manipulative woman named Marjorie Deal Armstrong. If you want to keep following these dark, twisted rabbit holes with us, make sure to hit that subscribe button right now so you never miss a deep dive. Rothstein told investigators that Marjorie had murdered Roden in a dispute over money and forced him to hide the body. But the timing of this discovery, so close to the pizza bomber incident and geographically right next door to the ambush site, was far too coincidental for the FBI to ignore. Investigators had to ask themselves, were these two bizarre crimes connected, or was Erie simply home to multiple, completely unhinged killers? The introduction of Marjorie Deal Armstrong completely derailed the investigation. Marjorie was a local legend in Erie, but for all the wrong reasons. She was a former high school valedictorian who held master's degrees, possessing a documented genius-level IQ. However, she also suffered from severe mental illness and had a terrifying history with the men in her life. She had previously shot and killed her boyfriend in the 1980s, claiming self-defense, and had been acquitted by a jury. Another of her husbands had died under highly suspicious circumstances. Now, she was at the center of a frozen body investigation. But Marjorie vehemently denied having anything to do with the collar bomb plot. She was erratic, incredibly arrogant, and seemed to thrive on the attention of the police. Investigators were completely torn. Bill Rothstein, the man who called in the frozen body, was also a brilliant eccentric who loved building things. He had a garage workshop full of tools and scrap metal, the exact materials used to build the deadly collar. Was Rothstein framing Marjorie to cover his own tracks, or was Marjorie manipulating Rothstein from the shadows? The web of lies grew thicker every single day. The breakthrough finally came when a confidential informant stepped forward with a piece of the puzzle that linked everything together. The informant revealed that Marjorie Deal Armstrong had been desperately trying to hire a hitman to kill her own father because she wanted her inheritance early. But she did not have the cash to pay a hitman. She needed exactly $250,000, the precise amount demanded in the bizarre bank robbery note carried by Brian Wells. The pieces of the puzzle were finally snapping into place. Marjorie had the motive, the intelligence, and the sheer ruthlessness to orchestrate the plot. Bill Rothstein had the mechanical skills, the workshop, and the proximity to the ambush site. Together, they formed a terrifying alliance. But they did not act alone. They had recruited a small circle of local misfits to help execute the plan, turning a delusional scheme into a fatal reality. The scavenger hunt was not just a distraction. It was a sick, twisted game designed by Marjorie to prove her intellectual superiority while using an innocent man as a disposable delivery system for a bomb. When investigators looked back at the timeline with this new information, they tore apart every single detail of the weeks leading up to the bombing. They quickly discovered that James Roden, the man found frozen solid in Bill Rothstein's chest freezer, had not been killed over a simple money dispute as initially claimed. Roden had actually been Marjorie Deal Armstrong's boyfriend at the time, and he had learned about the collar bomb plot. Realizing the sheer insanity of the plan, he had threatened to go to the police and expose the entire operation. To silence him and protect the scheme, Marjorie murdered him in cold blood and then forced Rothstein to hide the body. This horrifying truth proved exactly how far Marjorie was willing to go to execute her master plan. The bank robbery was never a sudden, impulsive act. It was a cold, calculated operation that had already claimed a life before Brian Wells ever delivered that fatal pizza. The mastermind was actively covering her tracks, eliminating witnesses, and moving forward with a level of ruthless precision that genuinely shocked seasoned FBI agents. The massive scale of her deception was finally coming into the light. As authorities closed in on Marjorie and her co-conspirators, the FBI gathered a mountain of circumstantial evidence. But they still needed hard proof to tie Marjorie directly to the deadly metal collar. They began interviewing inmates who had been housed with her after she was arrested for the murder of James Roden. It turned out that Marjorie simply could not keep her mouth shut. Her overwhelming narcissism and desperate need to be recognized as a genius proved to be her ultimate downfall. She openly bragged to fellow inmates about her involvement in the pizza bomber case, detailing highly specific elements of the crime that had never been released to the public. She spoke about the mechanical design of the explosive, the mathematically impossible timeline of the scavenger hunt, and exactly how she had manipulated the men around her to do her bidding. The investigators realized they were not just dealing with a murderer. They were dealing with a psychological terrorist who felt absolutely zero remorse for the innocent life she had extinguished. The net was finally closing tightly around the mastermind behind the darkest day in the history of Erie. Everything finally shattered when the ultimate truth of the ambush was revealed. The shadowy figures Brian had mentioned to the police, the remote location of the transmission tower, the bizarre instructions, and the motive, all connected in a horrifying final act of betrayal. The investigation revealed that Brian Wells actually knew some of the conspirators casually through his job at the pizza shop. They had allegedly tricked him into participating, telling him it would be a fake bomb, a simple prop to scare the bank tellers, and promising him a cut of the stolen money. But when Brian arrived at that desolate transmission tower deep in the woods, the trap was aggressively sprung. He realized, with absolute terror, that the heavy, boxy metal collar was not a fake prop at all. It was a real, live explosive. When he tried to back out and run, the conspirators forced the device around his bare neck at gunpoint, clicking the heavy padlock shut. The true horror was that Brian was both a coerced participant and the ultimate victim. The entire scavenger hunt was a sadistic, theatrical production designed to keep the police completely distracted while Marjorie and her crew safely watched from a distance. The realization that Brian had been betrayed, locked into a lethal contraption, and sent on an impossible mission to die is a reality almost too dark to comprehend. It was a masterclass in human cruelty. The psychological implications of this crime are deeply and viscerally disturbing. Marjorie Deal Armstrong did not just kill Brian Wells. She stripped him of his humanity, turning a living, breathing person into a mechanical object, a literal ticking time bomb to be used and discarded. The sheer sadism required to write those taunting scavenger hunt notes, knowing full well the man reading them was going to be blown to pieces, defies all logical understanding. It forces us to confront the terrifying reality that monsters do not always hide in the shadows. Sometimes, they are former high school valedictorians living right down the street. The case exposed severe flaws in how law enforcement handles completely unprecedented hostage situations, as the responding officers were utterly paralyzed by the bizarre nature of the threat. Brian's death on live television traumatized an entire community and forever changed the landscape of American true crime. He was a gentle man who cared for stray cats, violently thrust into a horrific spectacle by a woman whose intellect was completely overshadowed by her profound malevolence. The visual of Brian, sitting on that hot asphalt, knowing his time was running out, while surrounded by people who could not help him, remains one of the most haunting images ever captured on camera. In the aftermath of the investigation, justice was slow and incredibly complex. Bill Rothstein, the man who physically built the bomb, died of cancer before he could ever face formal charges for the bank robbery, taking many of the mechanical secrets of the collar to his grave. Marjorie Deal Armstrong was eventually convicted of the bank robbery, conspiracy, and weapons charges. She was sentenced to life in federal prison, plus 30 years, ensuring she would never walk free again. She spent her final years behind bars, still arrogantly claiming her innocence and filing endless delusional appeals until she passed away in prison in 2017. The remaining co-conspirators received lesser sentences for their roles in the tragic plot. If you found this deep dive into one of America's most bizarre crimes fascinating, please make sure to subscribe to the channel right now so you never miss another documentary investigation. The pizza bomber case is officially closed, but the psychological scars it left on the city of Erie and on the grieving family of Brian Wells will never truly heal. As we look back at the tragedy of the pizza bomber, we are left staring into the darkest corners of human nature. I have to ask, what would you have done if you found yourself locked in that heavy metal collar, holding a handwritten list of mathematically impossible demands? Tell me your thoughts in the comments below, because it is a scenario far too terrifying to easily answer. The story of Brian Wells reminds us of our own terrifying fragility. A simple, everyday pizza delivery ended in a mechanical nightmare. It proves once and for all that absolute evil does not just exist in Hollywood movies. Sometimes it builds a bomb and waits for you in the woods.